Hello and welcome to Absolute Trust Talk. I'm Kirsten Howe, and this is our audio and video podcast here at Absolute Trust Council. I'm here with our associate, Jessica Colbert, and it's her first time on the show. So hopefully she's not too nervous. Our audience is very nice, so no reason to be nervous. I was going to do this episode about some news that I read in the Tony Bennett Trust Administration for a couple of reasons. First, I'm a big fan of Tony Bennett, but secondly, I know our audience really likes when we do the celebrity estate planning episodes, and we like doing them. So that was my plan, but we're going to put that off for just a little bit because we have been hearing about a really fascinating case that's right here at home in the Bay Area. And I think we need to talk about it because there's a lot there. There are a lot of lessons to learn. My local listeners are probably guessing that I'm talking about a house in San Francisco on Russian Hill specifically that recently went on the market with an asking price of $488,000, which is a lot of money. But in San Francisco, in that location, it is a ridiculously low price. So that has gotten a lot of attention. People are talking about it. Jessica, do you want to fill in a few of the details?
Yes. What we knew about the house when it first went on the market is that it is a 3-bedroom, single-family home. The property was being sold as is. The prior owner had died in the house, and the house came with a tenant who had a lease for over 30 years, allowing the tenant to live in the house and pay rent of only $417 per month. So any buyer would not be able to move into this home, and the rent they would get would not come anywhere near covering the taxes, insurance, maintenance, the repairs that come along with home ownership.
Right. The homeowner's insurance alone is probably close to $2,000 a year. The property taxes at this point, I don't even know, $20,000, $25,000 a year. So $417 a month is not going to do it. There's a house a few blocks from where I live that is just falling apart, and I live in a nice enough neighborhood, but there are holes in the roof that are, obvious, visible from the street. The windows are broken, and there's a big chain link fence around the front yard surrounding the property. And it's been that way for several years, as far as I know. And whenever I see something like that, my first thought is always, oh, somebody must have died, and now the family is fighting. And that's what I thought when I first heard about this San Francisco house. And what we found out about a week or so after it went on the market is that, in fact, the property is owned in trust. The grantor of the trust, the person who set the trust up, his name was Kenneth, and he died in 2022 at the age of 102. He's the person who apparently died in the house. And prior to his death, he had entered into a long-term lease. The lease expires December 31st, 2053, almost 30 years from now. And into that lease, he's only charging the $417 a month. The beneficiaries of this trust that own the house are Cheryl, Sandra, and Cedric. Now, Cheryl is, as I think I said, Kenneth's granddaughter, and also the tenant who's entitled to live there for the next almost 30 years. Sandra is Cheryl's mother and Kenneth's stepdaughter. Sandra lives in the house with Cheryl. And then that third beneficiary is Kenneth's son, Cedric, who is Sandra's brother. Cedric, I don't believe, lives in the house. I have not seen any reference to him living in the house. So apparently, the other thing that we know about this situation is that this trust owns the house, and pretty much that's it. There are no investments, no bank accounts, nothing like that. all of that money, those liquid assets, have been spent probably by Kenneth because he lived to be 102. And that's a lot of years to be living off of your savings. Just a few other things we know about this situation. The trustee of the trust is Todd, and Todd is another one of Sandra's children. In other words, a step grandson of Kenneth, Cheryl's brother. He's the trustee of the trust, but he's not a beneficiary. So as the trustee, he's the one who had to put the house on the market. Sandra apparently has been expressing unhappiness about the house being sold. She's talked to the press. She doesn't want the house to be sold. The house did get several offers pretty quickly, some of them over the asking price. And apparently the trustee has accepted one of the offers. It was an offer at the asking price, and that buyer is Cheryl. So she's a trust beneficiary. She's the one who has the lease allowing her to live in the house, and she now is offering to buy the house, and apparently the trustee is going to sell her the house.
Now, I know that the family home is often a big issue in our planning and a big problem after the homeowner dies. What are some of the issues you see here with this situation?
Well, yeah, the family home often causes a lot of problems. The thing that really jumped out at me first about this is that the plan that the grantor, Kenneth, set up, at this point, really the only way it can work is for the house to be sold, because the income from the rent is so very low. It's going to be like not even $5,000 a year. And the expenses associated with owning a house like that are way, way, way more than $5,000 a year. So without there being a bank account or an investment account for the trustee to use to pay expenses, it just isn't going to work. So they're really, Sandra may object to it, but really the trustee has to do what the trustee has to do, and he's going to sell it. And that's really the only way that this plan can work.
I know we've seen this before, where a plan that worked when the grantor may have been much younger and there were a lot of liquid assets available to make it work just won't work after many years of the grantor spending those assets.
Yeah, this is definitely something that we have seen in our practice. And so it's really important to kind of keep these things in mind, that you've got to do the math from time to time and see if what you've planned out is actually going to work. Another thing about this case that kind of jumps out at me, and maybe that's I'm paranoid, I'm always looking for this, but is the idea of undue influence. So remember what we said was this gentleman died when he was 102 years old, and just about a year prior to his death is when he made this arrangement with this long-term lease and the very low rental payments. And the arrangement, which is very favorable to Cheryl, he made at a time when, as I said, he was 101 years old. Cheryl's living with him in the house, possibly very much involved in his care. So I think the question has to be asked, was there any kind of undue influence on Cheryl's part to persuade him to treat her so favorably in his estate plan? I don't see any evidence of that, but it's a question that I think has to be asked. I don't mean to disparage that family. Maybe everything's fine, but it's just a question that I think an attorney would ask in this situation.
How do you think that this plan could have been done differently?
Well, I think one thing that more and more I've been trying to convince my clients to think about is that If what you want is to make sure that a particular family member, will have a place to live after you go. So in this case, you could look at the facts and think Kenneth must have been concerned that Sandra and or Cheryl would need a place to live if he died. And this long-term lease was his attempt to make sure they'd be okay. But having a place to live, having that kind of security doesn't necessarily mean you have to have this place to live. So perhaps a better plan would have been the house has to be sold after I die. And then Sandra gets a big inheritance, Cheryl gets an inheritance, and Cedric gets his inheritance, much, much bigger inheritance than what they're going to get now. Now the house is being sold for $488,000. I've read that without this lease standing in the way, it probably could be sold for 1.8 million. So for the three of them to split 1.8 million, as opposed to splitting 488,000, that would give Cheryl and Sandra, quite a bit of money to buy another less expensive place, or even just rent, live in an apartment and rent for many years. It's a lot of money. So I try to encourage people to, if possible, not treat the family home with such preciousness. It's a place to live, and it is an asset, and it can be turned into money. So just think about that, is I guess what I would say.
That's a good point. And also, when we are talking about real estate in California passing from one generation to the next, we have to consider Prop 19. How does that factor in here?
Yeah. Prop 19, that is a very good point. So when Kenneth died, this was his primary residence. So under Prop 19, he could have passed his primary residence to a child or stepchild. And the property taxes would not go up as long as that child made the home their personal residence. So he could have passed the home to Sandra, who was already living there, and she's his stepchild, and the property taxes would have gone up. The report that I saw is that the assessed value before Kenneth died was about $143,000, and the assessed value was going to be over $1 million more than that after Kenneth died. So you can only, under Prop 19, protect $1 million of your low property tax basis, but it would have kept the property taxes quite a bit lower. However, in this case, because of that lease, what the beneficiaries are getting would not entitle them to the Prop 19 protection of the property tax basis. So the property taxes, when Kenneth died, went up to fair market value, whatever that would be. It's, I think it's going to be in the $20,000 range per year based on what the property is worth. So that's not a good outcome. Even if Sandra and Cheryl stay in the house, they're going to have to pay those taxes. And that's a lot of money. That's a big difference. Kenneth was probably paying $2,000 a year or some, really ridiculously low number. So what I'm saying is he could have left the property just to Sandra. The property taxes would have stayed relatively low. Sandra would have had a place to live. She could have allowed Cheryl to live there too, if she wanted to. And then she could have even, on her death, passed the house on to Cheryl. And again, parent to child transfer, that's okay under Prop 19. So, possibly if really what he was concerned most about was making sure those two had a place to live, he should have left the home to Sandra and kept the taxes low. And then that would have more or less guaranteed that Cheryl would inherit it after Sandra's death.
Of course, this would mean that Cedric, Kenneth's son, got nothing. And that might have been an unattractive option for Kenneth.
Yeah, that is a problem. when we are trying to preserve a particular asset, it makes it complicated, and it's really hard to get everything that you want. Sometimes estate planning is about making choices, and they're not always great. You don't always get everything that you want.
Well, there are a lot of lessons here, but the one that really stands out and perhaps covers it is when circumstances change, you need to talk to your attorney and your plan might change.
That's right. When Kenneth started spending down all his assets, it completely changed how this was all going to work, and would have been a good idea to talk to his attorney and see what changes should be made. So good job, Jessica, for pulling that very important lesson out of this conversation. Thank you all for listening and watching, and we look forward to connecting with you next time.
Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Absolute Trust Talk Live. If you enjoyed listening in, then don't forget to subscribe. You can find us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you may listen by searching Absolute Trust Talk. While you're there, we would also love for you to leave us a review. And then why not share your favorite episodes with family, friends, or colleagues too? You can find all of our shows and corresponding show notes by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com. You'll also find a variety of other free resources, including our ebooks, videos, blogs, presentations, and more. If you need help with your estate planning or administration, we also offer a free discovery call to help get the process started. You can find more information on booking your session by visiting absolutetrustcouncil.com/scheduling. Don't forget to keep an eye out for our next live episode. If you join us for the broadcast, you can submit questions during the show. But if not, don't worry. You can always get in touch with us by sending a quick message to info@absolutetrustcouncil.com. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you soon.